Hello, welcome to Why Am I Like This on the 16th of February in Perth, Australia. Um, Why Am I Like This is a container I hold, which I would say is a product of a lineage space in the Broom Discord, which I call 000, which also translates to seeds of seeds of seeds of life. And it's a container where I hold space for transmissions in response to questions which are offered to the container of why am I like this. And the question which I felt called to bring in today comes from my cousin, her name's Kelly. And the question is, what does it feel like when you get nudges? I feel like everybody who's in the container right now gets nudges. So I'd love to throw the question to y'all before um, I say anything else and hold space for your offerings. And I'll just set the container in the unseen for now. I guess I'll say that whatever y'all want to offer does not have to meet the guarantee which I usually um, set for the container of why am I like this. If that lowers the bar in any way, which makes y'all feel like more comfortable with sharing. I guess while I'm waiting for responses, I'll say that if you want to join the container of why am I like this live, you can join the Broom Discord, which you can access from thebroom.us, and also probably from the link to join the Discord server, which is going to appear in the description of this podcast or this video on YouTube or this thread on Threads or X or Mastodon, if that's how you found it. And Why Am I Like This typically takes place at 10 o'clock in the morning, Perth, Australia time, which is roughly 9 p.m. Um, Eastern US time, and somewhere in the middle if you're in Europe. What does it feel like when you get nudges? Tierra Pokota Namasotere. Intrepid Body says feels like sometimes body tingles. Just getting downloads about what I'm supposed to say in this container. Sometimes, like I'm hearing a guiding voice from the quote beyond unquote sometimes too. That was also Intrepid Body as a continuation. So would you say, I'll just say Hoda because I've said Hoda before. But please let me know if you'd rather I just use Intrepid Bodies, please. Um, Anna says, can I ask a question about this? What is fine, cool. Well, I want to ask if you associate those different sensations with different energy centers or chakras or other subtle organs that you might refer to by name. But I also want to hold space for Anna's question. Well, it says, I would say yes regarding energy centers. And would you care to correlate those different sensations with different energy centers? I feel like that's such a passive aggressive way to ask that question, which is definitely conditioned in my lifetime, in my vessel. Would you care to remove your shoes off at the door? Anna asks, I'm curious how you differentiate this from everyday thoughts. Lovely. I felt like that's kind of where this container might go. Would you care to answer that question? What? Or would it be beneath you? Or above you? Shara kara temetera tameshotem. Karate temeshla. Tora patafta neka. Kitenama soro pananakale tora shatanem. Welcome to the hypersanga of Why Am I Like This, where I hold space in text and voice. Please feel free to unmute, by the way, and say shady things and sometimes chant. To answer Noble's question, says Intrepid Bodies, I feel like body sensations feel connected to my gut most times. The voices I feel comes from a crown-like sensation or like a buzz. That's something I meditate on a lot, is like the difference between claircognizance and clairaudience. I feel like this root question is quickly becoming a forest of questions. Intrepid Body says in response to Anna's question about differentiating nudges from everyday thoughts. Yes, I feel like I meditate to create containers in the unseen for everyday thoughts and say guidance. Mm. And says, I just felt the container unfurl. Kadara samatora senekiala. Koranashtaram siyatam. Love to hold space for your ideas about differentiating intuitive guidance, I'll say, from everyday thoughts. And Karaparasanakialam. Intrepid Bodies says, I'm offering gluten-free and dairy-free king cake outside the container. If y'all aren't familiar with king cake, I would say look it up. I feel like it's probably like a Louisiana-specific tradition. I don't think I've ever had a king cake because they had tons of gluten and, well, I'm fine with gluten, but tons of dairy. So I'm just like tuning into that offering. Karamasona lakam. Such a packed time of the year. I wouldn't say that there are any carnival or carnival celebrations in Perth, Australia, where I'm at, but there is a Perth festival, and then of course there are the Lunar New Year celebrations, which I don't think are like locked by calendar with Carnival, because I think Carnival's like a solar calendar celebration, right? Whereas Chinese New Year, as it's often referred to, is a Lunar New Year celebration. Anna says, it's so hard for me to explain the difference between intuitive guidance and everyday thoughts. That's me filling in. But it definitely has a different texture. That's Anna. Or maybe timbre. It does feel packed. I think that was in reference to festival season. Would you say that one has a heavier texture and one has a lighter texture, Anna? And which is which? Anna says, I feel like everyday thoughts are dense as fuck. That definitely aligns for me. Yeah, I guess I'll infer that intuitive nudges feel lighter. I guess the next question I'll ask is, mm, does one of those have a sense of more nourishment? And what does that feel like? And which one is it? What's up, Sekana? What's up, Adam? I just realized I turned the volume all the way down because I chose to play an Instagram reel where somebody was talking about the Israel and Palestine conflict in the Levant at the end of the group exorcism container, which I called T, and today was T258. And I wanted to fade out the monologue for dramatic effect. So I apologize if anybody unmuted and I spoke over you because I couldn't hear you because I turned down the orator of the Instagram reel. And I says, also, sometimes I feel like they've been airdropped into my consciousness, is how I might also describe it. So that feels crown-like to me, or like related to claircognizance, or what people call claircognizance. I guess what I was hoping to like help attune to with my question about nourishment was like the way that I often describe nudges is like, well, sometimes I say it's like dipping a frozen banana into chocolate, Um, but sometimes I also say, like, there are these hyperdimensional shapes which we have to roll around in a symbolic material that we have available in our upper chakras or in our neural networks, and then we kind of see what sticks. And then after taking a few different imprints of that hyperdimensional shape, it's like our brain can construct from like several lower dimensional imprints of that hyperdimensional shape a sense of how to articulate the hyperdimensional shape within, I will say, like the hypodimensional material reality that we co-construct. So I guess I'll offer, like, if you take the textures of different things that you find nourishing, like music or like food or like nourishing human interactions or like nourishing animal interactions or even interactions with nature which feel nourishing. I guess I'm curious if you roll around, I'll say, the terma of intuitive nudges in those different textures. I'm curious what might stick for you, Anna. I'll also say, like, this is often kind of how my one-on-one sessions take shape with people, which is about often, like, for the most part, if we're not dealing with like crisis situations, it's about helping people to attune to their own guidance so that they can refine their direct experience with the divine and therefore gently release attachment to experiencing reality through other people's thought forms and, I would say, like, learned traits and behavioral patterns. And if you're interested in booking one-on-one time with me, then there will be a link in the description of this episode of the Broom Radio podcast. And it says, "We ask again. Sorry, I got distracted." No. um, I'll say my guarantee for this container is, um, I will not allow context to get enmeshed, and that context will be disenmeshed, and that I'll hold space for refinement or offerings of feedback with regard to this guarantee. And for people who came in a bit later, the question that I'm answering, I'm just going to drop into the chat again, is from my cousin Kelly. What does it feel like when you get nudges? And you can feel free to unmute or answer that question in text. So I guess, yeah, I'm just like opening my channel, and I feel like called to talk a little bit about the dynamics of like having an open channel, and then what a nudge feels like in relation to the framework which I'll transmit regarding having an open channel first. And then maybe I can talk about nudges, which um, perhaps like come in through different means. So I guess something I've been saying for about 2.5 years now, which I feel is true, is that I keep like an open channel at all times when I'm awake, and then when I'm asleep, I'd say like I have less like concept of what my channel is doing, and I would say like my channel is much more open because I tend to find sleep very easily, which is a blessing. Um, but what I mean by that, first of all, is that for me, an open channel basically arises from the alignment of all of the space times in my body, which is to say that every, you could say, like unit or quanta of space is entangled with quanta of time in my perception, and that when a moment in space and time in my subtle body is able to connect with another moment of space and time in my subtle body in degrees, then those two spaces and times are aligned. And then if you apply that concept to every moment of space and time in my subtle body, then you could say that that contiguous fabric of space and time is it constitutes a channel. And then I would say when the channels between all of those spaces and times in my subtle body are like fully open, then I would say my channel is fully open. Which is to say that if I'm keeping my channel like sort of narrow, it's not that each of those moments in space and time is necessarily obstructed from the other moments in space and time, which I would call, you could say like avoidant attachment, right? So I think avoidant attachment arises if I'm unable to fully see myself in a given space and time. Possibly because if I tune into that context of space and time, it brings up too much pain in my nervous system, and therefore I have to shut it down. And that's what I would call like avoidant attachment or blocking things out, colloquially. Um, Whereas I would say just like turning down the volume of the connection between all of those spaces and times. Um, I would say like, for me, increasingly happens like preconceptually, like my body does it in response to my body's understanding of its own capacity. And then I would say that when there's alignment between all of those spaces and times, even if it's at a very low volume, then that induces a current of ether through my channel. And that can go like from heaven to earth, or from earth to heaven, or you could say like from the earth star up to and through my crown, or from the crown down into the earth star. But I would say like the more that I've refined my channel, the more I've been able to align spaces and times in my subtle body, and the more that um, the current seems to mostly come up through earth and out my crown, which is to say, my sense is that I'm receiving gnosis through my earth star, and then gnosis from the cosmos, which of course includes earth, comes through the earth star and through my body. And I would say that my senses in current time, for a lot of people, gnosis comes from the crown into, let's say, like the crown, and then the third eye, and then the throat, and then perhaps the heart, and then often doesn't really go below that. And I would say a lay interpretation of that, first of all, is that I would say that there's like the spiritual energy of the cosmos, and then there's a spiritual energy of Earth, which is influenced by the spiritual energy of the cosmos, often through like solar flares and radio transmissions or other transmissions in the plasma which connects us with the sun of our solar system, which is also known as the interplanetary medium or the ether or the vacuum. And then I would say, and if you've been listening to like Why Am I Like This before, you might find a bit of this repetitive, but I would say that all human bodies that have ever existed, more or less, connect to collective realms, which we refer to as astral, mostly through what East Asian medicine calls the upper dantian or the upper chakras, so like the throat, the third eye, and the crown. And I would say that in the collective of human consciousness in current time, that realm is actually like fairly well insulated from the realms of intelligence which relate to the earth, which we connect to through the earth stars. And I would say the spirit of the cosmos, which we can connect to via the earth star, which is to say, yeah, like the analogy which is sometimes known as Plato's cave is fairly correct, right? Like in this analogy, humans basically live inside a cave and they see the light of reality via its projection onto the wall of the cave. And the projection contains the shadows of the humans themselves. But the humans tend to like look at the wall of the cave rather than to look at the unobstructed light of reality. Which is also to say that for me, according to my perspective, the realms that a lot of people are often deriving gnosis from are kind of distinct from the spirit of the cosmos and kind of insulated and locked away from the spirit of the cosmos. And I would say that the way that that realm is sealed from the spirit of the cosmos is an accumulation of human karma. And then part of the reason I would say that gnosis tends to come down through the crown and then make its way down, let's say, like as far as the heart, but doesn't go lower, is because I would say for the most part, in current time, most humans have a lot of karmic accumulation in all of those chakras, to be honest, but also in the solar plexus, in the sacral, in the root, and in the channels that live between the root and the earth star, which for me relate to ancestral karma or earth ancestral karma. And if those hyperdimensional shapes which were to come through those astral realms were to like get through and tickle or touch those karmic obstructions, it would often cause nervous system dysregulation. So in response to that, most people's bodies like tighten the channels to like guard or shield themselves, from my perspective, against this like energetic excitation so that they can stay regulated, so they can continue to function like normal people in our consensual matrix of reality. But that means that if there is any like metaphysical experience at all, then it tends to come from within this sealed off realm of collective human consciousness and is often, let's say, not only the same as the set of hyperdimensional shapes which are available through the cosmos, through the sun, through the Earth star. But also, I would say it tends to mostly be, I'll say, quote, polluted, unquote, by articulations of previous direct experience of the spirit of the cosmos, which has then been reified and distorted over time. And the image that comes to mind for me is like, if you live in a house or if you've been in a plane before, then you've been subject to like centralized air conditioning. And often those centralized air conditioning systems will recycle air. So they take air from somewhere, they put it into a container, and then people breathe in that container, and then they take in other people's breath from that container, and then they recycle it and pump it back into the container. So you could say that, yeah, like maybe for a lot of people who are tuning into the sealed off astral realm of collective human consciousness, then they might be breathing over like gnosis, which has been reified and possibly distorted many, many times within the sealed off realm of collective human consciousness, which originated with a direct transmission from the cosmos via the sun of our solar system, via the Earth star. And, examples of that might be like the prophecy of Muhammad or the teachings of Isa or Jesus or the teachings of the Buddha, Gautama Siddhartha, or the teachings of any of the prophets that we continue to venerate as prophets in our collective realm of human consciousness. And then I would also say that the thought forms that humans generate from their experience in the material realm also end up in that collective realm of human consciousness, which is mostly sealed off from what I've been calling the spirit of the cosmos. And they might have nothing to do with directly any of the direct transmissions which I just referred to. Although I would say it's pretty much impossible for them not to be indirectly informed by those direct transmissions, given the amount of influence that they exert on our collective realm of human consciousness. Which is to say that all of us grow up in belief systems, and some of those belief systems may be directly spiritual, in the sense that they are connected to somebody who's venerated as a prophet, or they may be indirectly spiritual, in the sense that they were beliefs which were allowed to be transmitted from person to person and within the collective realm of human consciousness because they were compatible with the spiritual belief systems that were referred to before. So I feel like most of us have probably had the experience of saying something to somebody, and then, either it triggers them and they attack us, or they just don't understand it and they continue speaking as if they heard like a different version of what you said. Or sometimes they talk about something else entirely, like maybe they're just on TikTok, like a lot of the older people in my life. And I would say that that's an example of when there's a transmission, not of like necessarily a hyperdimensional shape, but like a regularly dimensioned shape that we transmit through words, where that shape doesn't get through the filters which are formed by the shape of their existing belief system. Hmm. And I believe, if I recall correctly, Yuval Noah Harari talks about how Western modernism or social democracy is, in a sense, I think, an example of like a belief system which fits pretty well into a belief system which is sort of quietly Christian. Actually, I think he talks about socialism, which, social democracy is kind of like a compromised version of. Um, and the belief that he refers to is that all humans are equal. Uh, and I would particularize that assertion by saying that the Christian belief system, which is inherited into socialism, which is inherited into social democracy, is that all humans are equal in quality and quantity of value, right? So like their value is equal in quantity and also equal in texture or quality, which I believe is untrue. I would say that all humans are equal in value, but the actual quality of those values varies a lot. And while I appreciate the difficulties of designing systems for interactions between humans, which honors the equality of their value in quantity, but also honors the different qualities of their value, I appreciate that that's difficult. I would say that most um, political systems do a pretty poor job of that in the sense that they tend to enforce uniformity in order to optimize interactions within those systems. And where they don't tend to enforce uniformity, then we see vast discrepancies in the respect for the quantity of each human's value. I'm just going to read the chat. Psychonaut says, well, first Psychonaut said, I got lots of those shapes coming to me. And then he says, I think this is where symbols come into. It's almost like a magnifying glass by which the gnosis is refracted or intensified. Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's something about symbols which you could say human consciousness is very attuned to um, receiving and then being programmed by, um, which is to say that our evolutionary pathways, for the most part, have optimized for being able to recognize visual forms. And then, like, more recently, downstream of, I would say, like changes to our communication systems, which involve, um, I'll say, documenting sounds that constitute meaning using symbols like letters um, or ideograms, um, sort of reinforced that optimization in our evolutionary pathway to the point that also I'd say like the systems that we've created for conditioning humans in order to become like, I want to say, communicative or functional members of society is heavily symbolically driven. So our receptivity to symbols, either conceptually or visually, sometimes sonically, is pretty heightened, and therefore they become focal points for transmission of gnosis within the collective realm of human consciousness. And, I think in the course of this monologue so far, I've talked about transmission of symbols and concepts by words. And then I'd say mostly in other containers of Why Am I Like This, and in other containers where I share offerings from my lineages, I also talk about direct transmission of symbols and concepts without the use of words. Um, and I would say like I'm pretty much always transmitting. And I would also say that for most of us, like probably we've had the experience of having symbols and concepts transmitted to us from the collective realm of human consciousness in dreams or in trance states, like while taking a shower or driving, where we're able to, I would say, like slip into modes of channeling which allow certain shapes to come through. and then find articulation in the symbolic and conceptual materia of our awareness, which mostly lives in our upper chakras on a subtle level, according to my perspective. So I guess I'll just go back to what I was saying about keeping my channel open. And I'll summarize also that I talked about how channels can be open mostly upwards into the sealed off collective realm of human consciousness. And I would say that um, like a fairly ancient but also new relative to current time mode of channeling is to channel via the Earth star and then via the Earth star, via the soul of our solar system, and then the galaxy, and then yeah, I'll call it the cosmos from there, but could also refer to higher level celestial body constructs. But I think I'll say just as like a tidbit that once you get beyond the space-time of Earth and then beyond the space-time of our solar system and then beyond the space-time of our galaxy, I would say that many people can start to channel hyperdimensional shapes, or what I tend to call terma, um, via celestial bodies that are not legible or visible from our current space-time, which I think also contributes to why when people are receiving gnosis from outside of Earth, which perhaps like doesn't have like a historical paper trail, it can tend to be like a little confusing because often it can come from, you could say, like timelines or possibility lines, or possibility planes, which don't currently en masse align with our space-time, and maybe only align with our space-time through individual vessels. And I would say that a great many of those vessels tend to channel these timelines and possibility lines and possibility planes through a lot of distortion. And therefore, I'd say that a lot of the gnosis around things that happen outside of our space-time can be a little messy and conflicting. Psychonaut says, you also call it what? But I don't know what you're referring to. Because I wasn't looking at the chat when I was talking. So you could clarify the shapes. Terma, I call it terma, which is the topic of the very first episode of Why Am I Like This? I'm just going to write that out so you can search for it too if you want. I'd say the word comes from Tibetan lineages of spiritual praxis. I've also seen it referred to as Talmud. What it says, full circle moment for me. So, going back to what I was saying about having an open channel at all times, yeah, I'd say like my practice for about 2.5 years now is to maintain what feels like, I'll say, like a single thread of spider silk, which I would say extends, um, it's going from top to bottom. I would say it extends from the astral bodies of the cultivators of the cosmic chakras of my body, or you could say it extends from the astral bodies of the cultivators of the chakras of my cosmic body, which I connect to via Indra Sutra, which is the pearl of connection, which lives in my heart space, which I'd say most lineages refer to as a soul, or, westernized East Asian lineages, in my experience, refer to as the etheric soul to differentiate from the corporeal soul, and that each of the chakras in my cosmic body is connected to a deity, which for me is associated with a celestial body. So each of those astral bodies is connected to a celestial body, which is to say that the emanations of those celestial bodies are associated with deities or archetypes within the, quote, sealed off collective realm of human consciousness, unquote. And then that thread comes into my crown and it goes through all of my chakras and goes down through both of my legs, which represent my matrilineal and patrilineal ancestral experiences. And then it connects to the Earth star, and then from the Earth star, it connects to the sun of our solar system, which connects to the galactic center, which connects to, I'd say, Laniakea, which connects to other galaxies like what we call, quote, Andromeda, unquote, or which I call Ma'at. And what that allows for is a connection between, I would say, the undifferentiated spirit of the cosmos and the symbolic materia which is available in the collective realm of human consciousness. And that as these hyperdimensional shapes travel up and down this channel, then they're able to find articulation in my personal experience, which is to say, the experience of space and time in my present incarnation, and also through the experiences of my matrilineal and patrilineal ancestors, insofar as I am able to connect to them outside of distortion, which is introduced by karma, and it also connects to symbols and concepts which are available in the, quote, sealed off collective realm of human consciousness, unquote, which is why I'm able to articulate these hyperdimensional shapes, which mostly come from the Earth star and the spirit of the cosmos, using symbols and concepts which make sense to other humans in our collective realm of human consciousness. Does that make sense? And I would say I'm still not answering the question, but I just want to pause there to see if there's any questions that I can shed light on. But yeah, I'll say, there's no questions. I'll say that in my experience, or I would say like my moment to moment praxis, is to, I would say, preconceptually pay attention to nudges along that channel. And I think it was 2 episodes ago in Why Am I Like This, I talked about the difference between intuition and intrusive thoughts. And I'll say that often the shapes which come through that channel end up tickling or touching karma, which relates to intrusive thoughts. And what that usually does is it basically leaks off energy from those hyperdimensional shapes, and then it invokes mostly like thought forms, but also behavioral patterns, pardon me, which you could say are attached to moments of space and time, which are still disorganized by karmic obstructions. And then usually I'll feel that in my channel and I recognize it as a thought, which has, like Anna was saying, like a certain density to it. Or I could say, like, it doesn't feel like the undifferentiated energy of the spirit of the cosmos coming through the Earth star. And then usually what happens for me is I get like a little tapping when it reaches my crown, and my crown says, okay, this is a thought which has been invoked by a karmic obstruction which can be released. And then I basically ask the question, like, well, I'm asked the question and I ask the question, because I'd say at that level of selfhood, it's kind of difficult to differentiate. But the question forms in the symbolic materia of my upper chakras, whether I want to release it or not. And then I ask my body if it's aligned for me to release it or not. And I'll get like 3 yeses, like 3 jerks. And like, I feel like for the person who asked this question, Kellyanne, you've probably seen how my body jerks when I'm getting yeses. But essentially, um, like a wave travels through my body from my lower chakras up into the seal point, and then I usually like nod upwards 3 times. And then I would say my channel works to clear that karmic obstruction to make the channel smoother. And then usually after I've cleared a bunch, then the hyperdimensional shape can come up through that channel. And then you could say like different, again, like fingerprints which relate to lower dimensional captures of the shape of that hyperdimensional shape tend to form within my upper chakras. And then I would say that I have the felt sense of increasing traction on that hyperdimensional shape. And I think, yeah, like the metaphor, which is probably most accessible for most people, is like if you have a phone and you use your thumbprint or you use your face to unlock your phone, usually it's going to ask you to take different fingerprints or thumbprints. So you get multiple different images of your thumb, and then your phone's able to compute a 3D image of your thumb. Or if you're taking photos of your face from different angles and different lights, then you could say that you're assembling enough lower dimensional images of your face so that your phone can take subsequent images of your face and then find a sufficiently high correlation between that image of your face and all the other images of your face so that it can identify that you are the person who has the right to unlock your phone. And I would say that that's basically what's happening when I get intuitive nudges. It's like my body is sort of like taking different captures of the terma, and then it's matching those captures to the images that arise in each moment of space and time in my body so that I can find like words or images or even like behaviors that match, I'll say, like the hyperdimensional shape of the spirit of the cosmos that I have access to through my channel. And I would say that that's always attenuated. Like my ability to channel the spirit of the cosmos is always attenuated by the karma that's available in my vessel, and which is sometimes necessary in order to transmit those thoughts, right? Like I would say, even when I'm channeling words like I'm channeling now in this container, where I guarantee that context will not be enmeshed and that context will be disenmeshed, I'm allowing these hyperdimensional shapes to touch thought forms, and thought forms are karmic accumulations. But I would say that they're karmic accumulations which are compatible with the shapes of the spirit of the cosmos in that moment. And then I would say often the karmic accumulations, like I said before, which are not compatible with the spirit of the cosmos in that moment, end up being cleared so that my vessel can more adequately make these lower dimensional shapes which correspond to the higher dimensional shapes of the terma that I feel called to transmit. And I guess to answer the question much more concretely, I'll say, yeah, I'd say like the felt sensation of nudges usually starts with some kind of stirring in my body. Sorry, I'm getting something. But um, often, like, that's shown to me in ways which are physiological or preconceptual, right? So as not to overly constrain the context of what wants to come through. Um, and often that ends up taking the shape of feeling like moving my body. So probably like many of y'all have probably seen me just like moving my hands and my fingers, whether like holding mudras or making shapes, which I would say correspond to making shapes in the ether, which I have talked about in previous episodes of Why Am I Like This, as like somewhat akin to like when you feel like you're itchy, right? So like when a mosquito lands on your foot and then you start to get the sensation of itchiness, then I would say that there is intelligence in your foot which is communicating with the rest of your body so that you can notice that there's a mosquito on your foot. And I would say, like, counter to the teachings of many lineages, so that you can orchestrate your movement to get rid of that mosquito and possibly kill it. And I would say that the same is happening when I'm channeling movement in my body. It's like I'm communicating with the body of a vaster being so that I can receive energies through, I would say, the spirit of the cosmos or the body of reality. And then I can be moved to do things within the collective realm of human consciousness, which allow that body to function in a way that, from my perspective, improves the health and the homeostasis of that body. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions about that? And I just want to repeat that this is all just my perspective. And there could be people who disagree with the nature of what I'm transmitting, and there have been people who disagree with the nature of what I'm transmitting. And then, yeah, I would also say that those hyperdimensional shapes find many, many different expressions in my body, whether it's speaking or drawing or singing or moving or saying when I don't understand what somebody's saying, or making facial expressions or saying things like "oishi" if I eat something which is very tasty. And I would say very, very few of these expressions tend to reflect what many lineages tend to refer to as spiritually aligned behavior, which for me, in my experience, tends to map to a kind of like blank and I would say like non-vital facsimile of equanimity and serenity, which I would say is generally not reflective of the symphony of, I'll say human, but also natural expression. And I guess I'll also say that probably many of us have had the experience where we feel like we're channeling something that feels divine, but then being told that our expression is somehow aberrant or somehow unseemly or inappropriate according to the belief systems that the people who are projecting these interpretations onto us are, quote, possessed by, unquote. And I would say that the perspective that I have formed in my collaboration with the spirit of the cosmos, that I call the spirit of the cosmos, has often led me to dismantling those belief systems because I feel they exert an uncosmic downward pressure on the natural expression of many sovereign beings. And with that, I'll say thank you for tuning into this episode of Why Am I Like This? Um, I'm not going to say anything like feel your feels or be your authentic self, because I feel like while those things are very friendly for character limits and sound kind of pithy, I wouldn't say that they're necessarily guaranteed to not enmesh context or disenmesh context. So I'll just say thank you again for tuning in. This has been a production of the 000 Lineage Space and the Broom Radio. And if you would like to support this offering, then you can find links to support this offering in the description of this episode. And if you would like to join these containers live and make offerings, either to this container or the many other juicy and auspicious containers which we share via the Broom Radio, or if you would like to join the spiritual community known as the pot inside the broom, then you can also find links in the description of this episode. Thank you very much, and goodbye.